Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we're going to talk about replacing a surface-mounted door lock or an old deadbolt lock.
That's the name of the podcast?
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Old Deadbolt, I'm guessing.
We'd like to thank Jose James for liking and sharing the podcast. One of the oldest types of door locks is a rim lock, R-I-M. The main body of the lock is square or rectangular, and it's mounted to the inside of the door with screws. A small hole is drilled through the door for a key cylinder so it can be unlocked from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
The latch extends out of the edge of the lock and goes into a lock strike that's mounted on the door jamb, which is the wood frame around the door. There isn't a hole drilled through the edge of the door for the latch, which you have to do with a standard deadbolt lock. One of the first patents for a rim lock was in 1830.
Cool.
If you move into an older home or condo, you could have a surface-mounted rim lock rather than a deadbolt.
Uh-oh.
And if you want to replace the rim lock with a standard deadbolt or an electronic deadbolt, you're going to have to increase the size of the opening through the door and then drill a hole for the latch through the edge of the door.
How big is the hole for a rim lock?
Most rim locks require a 1 1/4 inch hole for the key cylinder. If you have an older deadbolt, it could have a hole that's 1.5 inches or 1 5/8 inches in diameter.
How big is the hole for a deadbolt?
For a modern deadbolt, the standard hole size is 2 1/8 inches in diameter, and it requires a 1-inch hole through the edge of the door to that 2 1/8 inch hole. So if you plan on replacing an older lock that has a small hole through your door to a new deadbolt, you're going to need a 2 1/8 inch hole saw and a 1-inch hole saw or a paddle bit. The problem, though, with trying to use a hole saw to enlarge an existing smaller hole is the pilot bit doesn't have anything to drill into to hold the saw in place.
Can you explain a hole saw and a paddle bit first, please?
A hole saw is a circular saw with cutting teeth on the front edge of the tool. It's
not like a circular saw.
It's a
saw that's circular.
It's a saw that's circular, and it has cutting teeth on the front edge, and it's connected to an arbor. The arbor has a pilot bit that extends past that cutting edge of the hole saw, and that starts and centers the saw in an exact spot, and it keeps the hole saw from moving when it makes contact with the surface of the door.
Okay.
There's a shaft on the other end of the arbor that you connect to a drill.
So you can't hold the hole saw in place without the pilot bit?
No, the saw will just jump around and damage your door.
Okay, how about a paddle bit?
A paddle bit is also called a spade bit or a wood boring drill bit. It has a center point that extends past the top cutting edge of the bit to center the cutting edges. It cuts a hole pretty quickly through wood, but it makes a rough cut. So with either type, you need to make a guide to hold the tool in place or purchase a lock installation kit if you're increasing the size of a smaller hole.
Okay. What is a door lock installation kit?
They can vary a little in design, but in general, you have a plastic tool that looks J or U-shaped if you look at it from its side. There's a 2 1/8 inch opening on the side to guide a hole saw, and it can be adjusted to a 2 3/8 or 2 3/4 inch back set. The guide is held to the door with a built-in clamp, or you use screws into the edge of the door to keep it in place. The screw holes will match up to holes that will hold the lock's latch in place.
Smart.
There's a 1-inch hole for the edge of the door to create an opening for the latch. The kit is going to come with a 2 1/8 inch hole saw and a 1-inch hole saw and an arbor with a pilot bit. But check the label for the type of hole saws. It's going to be designed for wood or wooden metal. The wood kits are less expensive, and the saws have bigger teeth for wood, which is great if you're only doing wood doors.
Right.
The kits for metal and wood are a little more expensive, but the bi-metal hole saws will cut through wood, plastic, and metal.
What is bi-metal?
Bi-metal means it uses 2 types of metal in the saw. High-speed steel is used for the teeth for strength and durability, and the teeth are smaller, so it cuts through metal smoother. And I just helped my son replace a rim lock with a deadbolt. He bought a condo in a high-rise building that was built in 1954, so it had an old rim lock on the front door.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has pretty cool-looking old doorknobs on the bedroom and bathroom doors.
Does he think they're cool?
I hope so, because otherwise I'll be changing those too.
What is considered a high-rise?
In Chicago, it's a building that's 7 stories or higher. So my son's front door is wood, but the frame is metal, so we had to drill a hole through the metal frame for the latch.
Ah, tricky.
And for this project, I picked up a bi-metal door installation kit that comes with a 2 1/8 hole saw, a 1-inch hole saw, and a 1-inch paddle bit.
Okay. Let's cover the steps to replace the lock.
I removed the 4 screws that held the lock to the inside of the door and removed it, and rim locks are going to have 3 or 4 screws.
Okay.
Under the lock was a metal plate with 2 screws that held the key cylinder in place. So I removed the 2 screws and then the plate, then I pried off the key cylinder from the outside of the door. The lock strike was held to the metal door jamb with 4 screws, which left 4 holes that we're going to have to fill.
How will you fill them?
I'll probably use a 2-part epoxy to fill the holes and then sand it smooth. Bondo is also good for filling holes in metal. The 2-part epoxy, though, is handy because you just mix the amount you need.
Right. What are some top-rated 2-part epoxy companies?
JB Weld, it's just the letter J, the letter B, WELD. PC Products, it's the letter P, the letter C, Products, PRODUCTS, Gorilla, and Loctite.
Cool. Back to the door lock project.
The hole saw guide I have is held to the edge of the door with 2 screws. The kit comes with a drill bit to create pilot holes for the screws, and has holes on the edge of the guide to mark the screw locations. The pilot holes you drill will match up to the screw locations to hold the new deadbolt latch in place.
Oh, that's good.
The end of the guide adjusts to 1 3/4 inch wide doors, which is usually the width of an exterior door, or you can adjust it to a 1 3/8 inch wide door. I centered the 2 1/8 inch opening on the guide over the old hole in the door, and then adjusted the back set to match the doorknob below it. I marked the screw locations on the edge of the door and then drilled the 2 pilot holes.
Cool.
If you have a guide with a clamp, you would center the guide over the old hole and then clamp it in place.
All right. When marking the screw locations, does it matter if you use a pen or a pencil? Or should you use a magic marker?
For a project like this, I like using a mechanical carpenter's pencil because you can extend the graphite to fit into small spaces and you can sharpen it to a fine point. Construction markers work on a wide range of materials and rough surfaces.
All right. What are some top-rated marking pencil companies?
Hultafors, it's HULTAFORS. Ox Tools, it's just OX Tools, and STKR, and just the letters STKR. Some top-rated construction marker companies are Hultafors, Milwaukee, and Revmark. It's REV, capital MARK.
Okay, back to the door.
I attached the guide to the door with 2 screws on the edge of the door. I attached the 2 1/8 inch hole saw to my drill, and then I bored almost all the way through on one side. I removed the 2 screws and flipped the guide over to the other side of the door. I put the 2 screws back into the edge of the door to hold the guide in place, and then I bored through from the other side. If you bore all the way through from one side, you can cause the wood to get pushed out from the opening. So using the hole saw on both sides helps prevent splintering of the wood, and the piece of wood in the hole saw is easier to remove because it doesn't go all the way into the hole saw.
Okay.
Then I drilled the edge of the door with the 1-inch hole saw and removed the guide. To mark the jamb for the deadbolt latch, I took the 1-inch hole saw off the arbor. I slid it into the hole on the edge of the door with the cutting edge facing out towards the jamb. I closed the door so the doorknob held it in place, and then I pushed and spun the 1-inch hole saw with my fingers to mark where I needed to saw on the door jamb. I opened the door, and then I used the 1-inch hole saw to bore a hole in the jamb. Then I had to create a mortise on the edge of the door for the rectangular plate on the latch so it's flush with the edge of the door.
What is a mortise?
It's a hole or a recessed area to fit something into.
Okay, back to the door.
So to create the mortise, I slid the latch into the 1-inch opening on the edge of the door and I drew a line around the plate. I pulled out the latch and used a chisel to cut into the outline I drew. Then I started at the top, inside the rectangular outline, and created a series of cuts from the top to the bottom of that area, the depth of the plate.
Mm-hmm.
With the beveled edge of the chisel facing down, I cut out the mortise. I put the latch into the door and then screwed it in place, then installed the deadbolt. If you have a wood jamb, you would use the strike plate as a template and create a mortise for that so it sits flush with the surface of the jamb.
Right.
And depending on how the old strike was installed, you may need some wood filler or new trim. But this is a pretty easy project with the right tools.
Mm-hmm. What are some top-rated chisel companies?
DeWalt, Stanley, and Irwin.
What are some top-rated installation kits?
DeWalt, Ryobi, Milwaukee, and Irwin.
What if you don't want to buy a door lock installation kit?
So if you have a 2 1/8 and a 1-inch hole saw, you can make a guide for the hole saws out of a scrap of plywood or a 1x6. But if you don't have hole saws and you plan on using these for metal and wood, the price of the wood metal kits are about what you'd pay for 2 bimetal hole saws individually, and then you've got the guide. But if you're only doing this for 1 or 2 wood doors with a wood jamb, you can pick up a 2 1/8 inch wood hole saw and a 1-inch paddle bit pretty cheap. And if you want to create your own jig, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can use a couple thin pieces of plywood around a 1/4 inch thick with at least one factory cut edge. You would use the paper template that comes with the new deadbolt and place it over the existing hole in the door. The paper is going to be marked for the edge of the door, and it folds over so you can line up and mark the edge of the door for the 1-inch latch hole. You would mark the center of the edge of the door, and the paper is going to have a mark for a 1 3/8 or a 1 3/4 inch wide door. Once you mark the edge and remove the template, you can use a level and draw a horizontal line across the edge of the door. Put your scrap plywood over the hole on both sides and square up the factory cut edges flush to the edge of the door, then clamp those 2 pieces firmly in place. Now use the paper template again and line up the edge over the line you drew. The template's going to have a mark for a 2 3/8 or a 2 3/4 inch back set. You're going to mark the one you need on one side. The pilot bit on the saw now has something to grab onto as you bore through the door. You're going to drill through on one side until the pilot bit just comes out of the plywood on the other side. Then you can remove the saw and use the pilot hole on the other side to drill back through the door from the other side. And this will work if you have a hole saw that's deep enough and a pilot bit that's long enough so it drills through your jig that you created, the door, and long enough to create a hole on the plywood on the other side. Because some aren't long enough, one hole saw I have is only 1 3/8 inch deep, and the pilot only extends 1 3/4 inch from the inside of the hole saw. So depending on how thick the wood is you put on your door.
Right.
Another hole saw I have is 2 inches deep with a pilot bit that extends to 2 1/8 inch from the bottom of the hole saw. And some hole saws will actually have adjustable pilot bits, so it's good for a project like this.
Okay.
Another way to create a jig is to take a piece of plywood or a 1x6 and mark it with your paper template from the deadbolt with the back set that you want. You're going to mark the line that extends through the center of the 2 1/8 inch hole to the edge, and mark the edge of the wood with the line for the latch location. You can clamp the wood down on a work surface and cut that 2 1/8 inch hole into this piece of wood. Use the paper template now over the door and mark the horizontal line on the edge of the door. Line up the line on the edge of your jig that you just created with the line on the edge of the door. Make sure the jig is flush with the edge of the door and clamp it over the old hole. Now you can bore through the door or bore halfway through and flip it over and use it on the other side to help prevent splintering.
Okay. What size piece of wood do you need?
If you have a 2 3/4 inch back set, The back of the hole is around 3 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the door. So you need a piece that's at least 4 inches wide. That'd be a good size. And then you need it tall enough so that you can use a clamp on the top and the bottom.
Okay. What are some top-rated deadbolt companies?
Schlage, it's Schlage, Kwikset, Kwikset, and Yale, Yale.
Do you have anything else to add?
I think those are some good tips if you need to increase the opening size on a door for a deadbolt. And you can check out our episode called Door Locks for some more tips on deadbolts.
Cool. Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 17 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.
Deep.